everyone, I'm Arlene Dickinson. Thanks for joining me on my podcast. It's absolutely critical that we support small business in Canada, and I am proud of my partnership with TELUS, who always puts owners first. This October, TELUS is celebrating Small Business Month by supporting owners with special savings. Get the latest tech to help transform your business with limited time offers. Visit TELUS.com/Small Business Month to learn more. Let's all support small business and continue to stand with owners.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Reinvention. Today, Arlene chats with the artistic director and co-head of the Toronto International Film Festival, Cameron Bailey. Movies undoubtedly play a big part in our lives. They make us cry, laugh, and shriek. They teach and enlighten us. They also uncover injustice and issues in the world. Seated at the nexus of the film industry, Cameron speaks candidly on how reinvention is needed to ensure it survives. And having not always been fascinated by movies, Cameron also shares how writing was what sparked his love for film, and how that all started at his university newspaper.
Hi everyone, we're here talking with Cameron Bailey, and this is our first video and audio podcast, so yay, I'm excited to talk to you, Cameron. And Cameron is the co-head and the artistic director for TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival. So welcome, Cameron, really nice to see you.
It's great to be here. Thanks for asking me to do this.
I have to ask, that picture behind you is like,
oh yes,
stunning. Who is it?
Let me introduce you. This is Therese Diop, and she was the star of the very first feature film made in Africa, a film called Black Girl, or in French, La Noire d'Eux, made in the mid-'60s by Ousmane Sembène from Senegal. And it's a film I love. I discovered it when I was in university. And when I took on this position as co-head and moved into this office, I thought, I want something inspiring with me every day, and she's just great company. So I love having her here.
No kidding. First of all, I mean, she's stunningly beautiful, but what a legacy to have been able to look back and leave, right? I mean, it's like, that's a pretty amazing career for her to have started and done that at a time when probably it was a very difficult thing to be doing.
And yeah, and she wasn't a professional actress at all. She was actually a kind of a clothing designer, and she did her own costumes in the film as well. So there's a great story behind it too.
Wow. So I've been really anxious to talk to you because I've been thinking a lot about, first of all, movies play such a huge role in our life. So I of course want to talk about what's happening with the whole reinvention of the movie industry and TIFF in particular, and how, you know, you've taken this huge event and what you're doing through the pandemic. But I want to start with you and your journey and how you got to where you are, because your story is also so fascinating. So take us back to, you know, the first movie you saw, to what got you so engaged in film.
Okay, you know, it's maybe not the expected route. I wasn't one of those kids who was obsessed with movies when I was very young. I was born in England, and my parents were both immigrants from Barbados. They met and married there. My sister and I were born there. I left England when I was 4 years old, got on a ship at the time. That was the way you traveled, and went back to Barbados, lived with my grandparents. And during that whole time, until I was really 8 years old, I didn't see movies at all. So I wasn't kind of familiar with just film culture from that time. And I came to Canada when I was almost 8 years old, started school here, and I was still more into books than movies. I was a voracious reader, and through the rest of elementary school, middle school, I would spend as much time as I could in the library. I eventually went to university, Western University, and did a degree in English literature. So I was still into books and reading and writing, and I started writing for the campus newspaper, the Gazette, then. And then I liked movies, and I began to actually watch and write about movies then. I took a film course or two while I was at Western. I began writing for the campus newspaper, reviewing movies, and that was really what did it. I think my love of film came alive when I was an undergraduate at Western.
And then so fair enough, because I think about books being, so many people I've spoken to who I find to be really fascinating individuals who have had, like rich lives like yourself, started in the book. They started with reading because reading became so central. And I wonder if reading isn't, I mean, it's theater of your mind, right? You go into these books and you start to see things and imagine these worlds that are created through words. And then, movies become kind of add the imagery to it. And it just is like this whole kind of, wow, everything opens up to you. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to read a lot, but it was because I couldn't afford to go to movies. We couldn't afford to go to theater.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did go, I was always just so, especially if you could see a movie that had come out of a book. It was like, oh my God, that's exactly how I imagined it. Or even worse.
Or sometimes they're not quite what you imagined.
That's right. That's not what I saw. That person should not be playing that part. Mm-hmm. So you graduate university and then what? How did you?
I came back to Toronto and I applied for a job at the local alternative weekly newspaper in Toronto, Now Magazine, as a film critic. And I got it. I think the first movie I was sent out to review as a sort of a test was the first Die Hard film. And I actually liked it. It's still one of my favorite movies. And they hired me as a kind of a freelancer. So I was a freelance film critic for many, many years. And also just kind of getting involved in the film community, like-minded people who wanted to put on screenings here and there in Toronto. And that eventually attracted the attention of some people at TIFF. The previous head of the organization, Piers Handling, hired me, and I came on board as a programmer, one of the people selecting the films, again, freelancing. And, I was a freelancer doing this and that for about 20 years before I came on board. And my first full-time job was not that long ago. So I really enjoyed that freedom as well.
So what's it like to be a critic? Because a film critic, I always think about, like, it's like a food critic. Are you loved and are you reviled and you're loved? Like, are you, because it both like, oh my God, here he's going to go again talking about this. Like, what happens?
A bit of both. I had a lot of freedom writing as a critic for Now Magazine because I was reviewing not just the big commercial Hollywood releases, but I would also go off to the Berlin Film Festival or to a festival in Burkina Faso in West Africa and just cover the festival from there. I wrote about documentaries and experimental films and indie films that people wouldn't see otherwise. And I kind of felt my job was to bring to light films that people wouldn't know about through, mass marketing from Hollywood. It's really easy to kind of give a thumbs up or thumbs down to a Hollywood movie, but there's so many great films out there. And I guess I was excited about just giving people the opportunity to see something that wasn't already being marketed to them. And that's, I guess, how I got into programming as well. A big part of the job is just, trying to find films that are going to excite people that they might not know about. You might not have heard of anybody in it or the director or anything like that. But there's just something in the story or the way the story is told that just kind of opens up your mind or your heart. And that was what I loved about bringing movies to audiences.
Is that a bit of the dark underbelly of the industry, though? Because the machine, it is a machine, right? These Hollywood
Absolutely.
blockbusters, I mean, they have so much money behind them and advertising, and they get kind of thrown out into lots of theaters. And so suddenly that becomes what you want to watch or think you should watch. And meanwhile, there's all these independent, beautifully crafted, not high production cost, but high production value, films that are out there that don't get the same reward and recognition. This year we had from South Korea, Parasite came out. I mean, it was kind of this film nobody had really heard about until it won. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think if you weren't already in the film world, Parasite would have been a new entity for you. It did premiere at the Cannes Film Festival. We showed it here in Toronto. It did very well on the major festival circuit. And the director is well known, again, among the cinephile crowd. But for a lot of people, he was a new phenomenon. His name's Bong Joon-ho. He's an incredible director and a very funny guy as well. And he made what I think was the best film of the year. And, he put in the grueling weeks and months campaigning to get noticed by the Academy voters, and it paid off. And it was really remarkable. It's the first time a film from South Korea, first time a foreign language film had won Best Picture at the Oscars. A lot of people saw it who would never have discovered it otherwise. So that was kind of a thrill.
But is it, just back to the question on, is it a shame that all these fabulous flicks are out there that nobody gets to see because they don't?
Yeah, it can be, but I tend to be an optimist. And what I will say is that, although Hollywood is a massive multinational corporate activity that's all about generating, revenue from different levels, from movie box office to what they call ancillary, the DVDs and Blu-rays and the streaming and all of that, all the marketing products, the tie-ins, all of that is a big, big business, billions of dollars worth every year. It still depends on talent. And talent is not something you can't fully quantify. And so, the people making Marvel movies, whether it's Black Panther or Iron Man, they came from independent films, right? They started making those small, beautiful independent films. And then eventually, the corporate entity, Marvel or now Disney, decided, I want some of that talent. That talent can be the engine for my corporate product, if you want to call it that. And that's the ecosystem that movies are. And you will find people moving sometimes back and forth between small independent films and giant Hollywood blockbusters. I don't think, and what we know for sure too, is that the small independent films don't fully survive without the big blockbusters either, because the blockbusters are what keep movie theaters open. And now, especially with so many of them closed around the world and all of them waiting for the next James Bond or the next big franchise movie, independent filmmakers benefit from those movie theaters being open around the world too. So it's you can't really have one without the other. The blockbusters depend on indie talent, and the indies depend on the blockbuster muscle to get their movies seen.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way. It makes me, I'm just thinking about a life full of watching movies, and I love movies, and I always choose my movies based on kind of my mood at the time, and I don't watch horror movies at all. Like I cannot watch a scary movie like for the life of me.
Really? Did you see Parasite? Can I just ask? Because it's a little scary.
You
should see it.
I know.
But it's fantastic.
Oh, I know, but like I'm just a baby when it comes to like Friday the 13th. No way. Like like somebody said, have you seen Chainsaw Massacre? I said,
okay, those are a bit gory, but a nice, not even a nice little sense of being in suspense.
Oh yeah, a little bit. A little bit.
Right.
What's the movie that you've probably been asked this a lot, but what's the movie that's influenced you the most in your life, like that had the biggest personal impact on who you are as a human?
That is a tough one, and honestly, I don't know if there's one single movie that's done that. There is a small handful.
Okay.
When I was in university, I think the first movie that really showed me what movies can do was one that is a little bit of an art house classic, but is a tough first watch if you're coming cold to it. It's called Weekend by Jean-Luc Godard. And Godard is, one of the real revolutionaries in movies, working in the 60s up to the present. And it's like he just threw out the rule book, It's like, movies have to have a beginning and a middle and an end. He said not necessarily in that order. This is a movie that told a story, but that was political, had totally different tones. It was just it could feel like it's all over the place, but it was doing something in terms of disrupting you as the person watching it. And I loved that. It was one of the movies that showed me what that art form could do in the way that a great novel can do that, or a poem or a painting in a museum. And I began to see movies as more than just entertainment from that point forward. So that's definitely one of them. But, there's so many others. I went to West Africa for the first time on behalf of TIFF in 1991 to the Pan-African Film Festival there. It's the biggest African film event in the world. And that just blew my mind open to a whole other kind of filmmaking and a whole film culture that I just didn't have access to at the time. And that's become a passion for me. And it's why I have Bystand on the wall behind me here. But then, there are Hollywood movies I also love. I was lucky enough in 1998. I was in Australia for a film festival, and a publicist who was working for the festival was also working on a movie shoot. And she said, come out to the studio. They're shooting this new movie. It's got a Canadian in it. You should come see it. And I went out, and the Canadian was Keanu Reeves, and the movie they were shooting was The Matrix.
Oh, wow.
And I was on set with the Wachowskis shooting The Matrix, and it was the dojo scene with Lawrence Fishburne. And, I hadn't heard anything about this film before, but it was kind of a cool scene they were shooting. And then, of course, it became this massive phenomenon. I've seen that movie, I don't know, like 15, 20 times, I think. And I just feel like I have this relationship with The Matrix because it was so revolutionary when it came out, and I felt like I got a glimpse before that all happened. So there's, movies are just a big part of my life. What can I tell you?
That's a cool story. I mean, you saw The World's Boyfriend. Like, I was heartbroken when you got like, what do you mean he's like with somebody?
Everybody's in love with Keanu now. He's an amazing guy as well. He really is.
Oh, yeah. Of course he is, because he just can't be like in my heart. Now you got to tell me he's also a really nice guy too in real life.
He is a super nice guy.
Sometimes you like people and then you meet them and you go, maybe not so nice after all.
Yes.
Like when you said that, I was thinking to myself a little bit about Life is Beautiful. I may not remember the name very well, but that film really impacted me because I saw it when I was, a little bit younger and not that young, much younger, but because what is that, like 20 years old about now?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just the whole way it was shot, the storytelling of it, the acting, like it just really hit me. I don't know, is that?
It is the great thing about movies, and that movie in particular is one of those films that it just has an emotional impact and it's one of the reasons I love movies. Movies kind of open you up, especially if you see them on a big screen with a crowd and the sound, and you're just immersed in it. You kind of surrender to the enormity of the story up on the screen. And when it hits your emotions, and when you're beginning to share those emotions with people around you who are strangers to you, right? It's a very strange thing to be in a movie theater and you're suddenly open and vulnerable with people you don't even know. And the movie's doing that for you. And I had that experience also with Life is Beautiful. I saw audiences watch it and just kind of, cry and laugh and be totally with it. And that's an amazing thing. I mean, that particular movie doesn't do that for me. Maybe others do, but everybody's got those movies that they respond to emotionally and that just kind of open them up in surprising ways.
Yeah, like Shawshank Redemption. Everybody would say that, but I love that movie. But I remember when he won for Life is Beautiful, the Oscar. And
Roberto Benigni, yes.
And
when he climbed over the chairs.
It was just, and that's in my mind. It's always these little things about movies, but I feel like there is this, I've sat on planes. I'm not gonna, lie. I've sat on planes, Cameron, and watched movies on what is like a 3x5 inch screen. Like probably the worst condition you can watch a movie in, and bawled my eyes out because
that's a thing. That's a real phenomenon.
Is it? Why?
People cry more often when they're watching movies on airplanes, when they wouldn't cry watching the same movie on the ground. And people have funny names for it, but it is something it's a genuine phenomenon. Somehow, I don't know if it's the air, the air pressure, the fact that you're in between places, you've left someplace, you're going to someplace else, you're kind of suspended, literally. But yeah, movies somehow have a bigger emotional impact on an airplane. It's a weird thing.
Well, I take Kleenex with me when I go on a plane. It's very, this is bad. But, talking about emotional impact and being, like watching movies wherever we are, we're at this really weird place. And I want to circle back to what I started off our conversation around, talking about what's happening in the world today. Your industry and is undergoing its own change. But TIFF, which is such an incredible global success story. I mean, congratulations on it, because it really, and I knew Pierce when he was there, and that's how I first met you, in fact, was through Pierce. And then and now you at the head of it, and running what is just such a phenom. I mean, who would have ever thought that it would do what it's done, not just for, you know, the film scene and the industry, but in particular for Canada and for Toronto, and the joy it's brought to the city and the experience. I mean, I've gone to a lot of TIFF events, and the events are its own thing. You know, you get to rub elbows with some of the Hollywood's biggest stars. You get to watch great movies. You get to, it's phenomenal. So people who haven't been to TIFF, who are listening to this podcast, I will tell you that it is truly an event in and of itself. It is an amazing, well orchestrated machine.
Well, thank you.
You're very welcome. And
it's, you know, we're lucky. There's a kind of alchemy that I think has happened over the years. We're 45 years old now, TIFF. And what's happened over that time is that the audience here at our festival has kind of made it all happen. The reason film directors and stars keep coming back to our festival every year and bring their new movies here is because they want to feel that audience reaction. We're the biggest public film festival in the world. We're known for having an audience that really knows movies, that loves movies, that's enthusiastic, that doesn't turn up kind of wanting to be impressed like sometimes happens at other festivals, but they're there to kind of appreciate what the artists have made and to share something together. And that's a rare thing. And I think people who, especially if you're making movies, and it's not like being a musician where you get to perform live every night, or a theater actor or something like that. Like, a lot of people who make movies very rarely get to be in the room as people are experiencing them. But when you go to a festival like ours, that's what happens. You know, the stars are there, the director's there, they introduce the film, and they'll often sit and watch the movie with the audience, sometimes for the very first time. And just to, like, in one of our big houses, Roy Thompson Hall with the Princess of Wales, to feel almost 2,000 people responding to a film, and you know that you're a part of having made that film, that's got to be one of the most gratifying things in the world. And we're lucky. I mean, our audience prize is still the most popular award at the festival. It's been one of those things. It's a kind of an indicator of future Oscar success and other award success. And it all comes down to audiences responding to films.
Which leads me right into a pandemic. And the world is a movie in and of itself right now, and everything shifted. How are you coping with the festival not being able to be on in September like it normally is? Like, I know you guys did other things, so maybe you can talk about what you did to try and compensate for it. But how do you feel about it, about what's happening? And
I'm incredibly impressed with what our team was able to do. If I could give a medal to every single person who works at TIFF over the past year, I would. We learned, like everybody did in the winter going into the spring, that the pandemic was beginning to get bigger and kind of sweep around the world. And in March, we had to close our own building, TIFF Bell Lightbox here in Toronto. But we thought we would still be back for the festival. We actually thought at that point the festival would be a normal festival and this would be part of the recovery. And then by the middle of the summer, we realized, nope, that is not happening. So what we have to do is reinvent the festival. And in the space, really, I'm going to say like 8-10 weeks, we came up with a new digital platform that allowed us to show movies to audiences online on a streaming service. We came up with the idea of drive-ins, which many people are doing now as well. And we had 2 drive-in venues we used during the festival. We invited 50 people, real leading lights in the film industry, to be ambassadors for our festival. We did all kinds of things that were brand new because we knew we wanted to still have that excitement, but we couldn't do it the same way. We couldn't use our big venues. We couldn't gather people in large numbers, which is what a festival is all about. So we kind of had to rethink everything. And the team here was just, they were all superstars. So I that is what we had to do. We're going to have to keep doing it. We know the pandemic's going to last for a while, so we're still thinking through what's next for us.
For people who are listening, Cameron, and who either have run an event themselves, like that's their business, they're in the event business, or they're in the festival business, or they are running a business in general, and who got caught the same way, that had a huge impact on their business. What advice would you give them, and how did you guys get through that? Because you make it sound like, well, as you say it, I think, well, yeah, that all makes sense. A drive-in and, digital this and, making sure everything's available and having ambassadors, of course. But I know it's not an of course. When something sounds like an obvious answer, it's because somebody took a lot of work and effort to get there. So how did you get the team rallied around Reinvention of the festival?
Yeah, I think it was at least a couple of things, maybe more. But for me, what comes to mind right away is we and Joanna Vicente, my co-head, and I decided at a certain point early in the summer that we were just going to do it. We were going to make it happen. And I think that kind of confidence and that certainty that you can deliver something for everyone who's expecting it, that's a key thing. And you can't be shaken from that. There's always a way, right? There is always a way to do it. And we were confident all the way through that. And then the other thing is you've got to just bring the best ideas to the table. You got to use everybody's imagination, not just your own. So we had a lot of Zoom meetings. We were on Zoom sometimes all day, every day, just talking every detail through. We knew that although we couldn't do a lot of the things we usually do, that there was a kind of a core essence to what TIFF delivered. And we had to really talk that through. Okay, why do people come to the festival? What are they looking for? They're looking for the discovery of something new, something that is going to feel transformative for them. They want to be taken somewhere else. They want to feel moved. All of those things you can still deliver in different ways. So we have to just drill down to what is the core value of what we do and how can we deliver that in the middle of a pandemic. I think for any business, that's probably what you also have to do. We've seen restaurants and other places that are also really suffering from this have to drill down to, okay, how can we deliver the pleasure of a great meal in a different way if we can't do it in our own restaurants? And for us, it was, okay, we know we can't, we don't have 2,000 seat houses that we can fill this year, but there is still something about the core experience that we can deliver, and we just found another way to do it.
But you say you're an optimist, but I know that as a leader of an organization, especially an organization as large and as important and as complex as TIFF is, that you as the leader were also going through your own kind of, I'm sure, fear and anxiety.
Hell yes, of course.
Right? So how did you do that? How did you get up and show up as the leader when you're basically getting up every day going, just like everyone else is, holy crap, what's going on in the world right now?
Well, we have to remember that not only was there a global pandemic, and there still is, but there was also this incredible social upheaval happening this same year with the George Floyd murder and the Breonna Taylor murder and the responses on the streets to that, the public protests, the real reckoning over racism. And so, there was a time in the middle of the summer of this year when it was hard just to focus because there was just so much going on that was just shaking up your whole world on a daily basis. Nothing was the same. None of your routines were the same because, first of all, it was hard to think about things when there were these massive street protests. Schools were closed, workplaces were closed. You couldn't go out. All of those things. It was like, is the world ending? There are days when you really think that. And I guess you kind of have to let that happen. You can't ignore that feeling. You have to just sit in it for a while. And then I guess there is something just about, the human spirit or who you are as a person or whatever it is that if you're lucky, you still have some drive to kind of push you forward and say, okay, there's a lot of just weird stuff going on right now. A lot of things that are are really shaking everything about what I know, how am I going to respond? What is my role here? What can I contribute? And I guess I've learned over the years, one way to deal with that is just to talk to other people, and sometimes my friends and family, but also, we've had several staff meetings here where you just kind of let it be an open forum, and talk through things with people, listen to how they're responding, and somehow understanding that other people are going through things that are as hard or harder than what I'm going through. Somehow that gives you more strength too. And yeah, I'm not going to say for a minute that this was an easy year, but I did find there is a path through it if you don't ignore what you're feeling and somehow try to find some sense of what specifically is important for you to do. And I guess that's how I handled it.
No, it's really good advice, because I think we can get stuck as leaders thinking we have to have all the answers. And I believe that what you did by turning to your team and to your friends and to others to not just get information, but potentially also get be consoled in terms of what was going on. Because as a person, we all need to feel like this is going to end in some way, hopefully for the better.
Hope so, yeah.
and we also need to feel like we aren't doing it alone. And leadership can be a very lonely endeavor. So it's unlike most leaders to be able to say, oh, okay, let's all talk about this together, because we think we have to have the answers. But I find that sometimes as leaders, there's a time when you have to stand out front and help people through things. And then there's a time where you have to be at the back and let your team lead the way. And in the pandemic, there was a little bit of both for me. I knew I needed to be out front to help lead us through it, but I also knew I needed to let my team help lead me through what we needed to go through together. So it was a little bit of this very interesting time for me to kind of think about how to engage people and it still is very difficult. Are you finding that you're getting in a rhythm? Or are you still finding that to be, and I guess just in conjunction with that question, Black Lives Matter and what happens and is continuing to happen with that movement has had to have a real personal impact on you as well. So like, how are you managing all that?
That's a big question. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to fully answer it, but let me give it a shot. Let me see. Last year, in the summer, my mom passed away. And the year before that, my father passed away. They weren't together. They'd been separated for many years, but those two things came in quick succession. And I guess one of the things I've taken from that, apart from, just the usual lessons about mortality, which I think we all have to remember, is just that, we all have a limited time. We can spend that time, I guess, kind of worrying about, am I doing the right thing, that sort of thing, or we can just act and understand that we might make mistakes. We might not always choose the right path, or we might have to kind of correct things or go back. But you should live, at least this is what I'm telling myself, you should live by what's important to you. Make those your principles. Speak up when you have to. Focus on what you want to get done in this life. And the passing of my parents really helped focus that for me. So I hope I'm doing that. I hope I'm doing them both proud. And I try to kind of constantly check back against that, because both of them went through, I think, a lot harder circumstances than I've had to, honestly. And so I don't want to waste that.
Yeah, well, that's a very good answer. I don't think that we can be so hard on ourselves, and we can forget, the context of the world, and that we are here for but a moment in time, and that we've got to do the best we can. But it is, my company, my marketing company, Venture, when the whole BLM movement started, they wanted to do something to try and help in some way, and they continue to want to help and do things, because it isn't just a moment in time. This is a societal change that
Absolutely.
has to be influenced. And so they came up with a campaign called, and they hashtagged it called No Bystanding. And it kind of dovetails into what you're talking about, which is, we can't stand by in our lives and just let things happen. We have to take charge, and we have to act, and we have to be who we are. And the whole idea of the campaign was that you just can't stand by and watch. You can't bystand as people are treated poorly, as things are going on that are not right, as human equality is put into question, and people are treated poorly as a result of whether the color of their skin or their religion or whatever the reason is. And in this case, with Black Lives Matter, I think it's very important for us to stop being bystanders in what's going on in the world. And it's like when you go to a movie, it's almost the same thing. Like if you go to a movie and you're not touched in some way that it has impacted you to help you be something better or do something different, then probably it was just maybe a frivolous endeavor that really wasn't worth the $20 you paid. I don't know. maybe life is meant to have more impact, I guess, and movies should have impact, and moments should have not just impact in the moment, but forever.
Yeah, and I try to always, when there's sort of these big upheavals happening in the world around us, and the things you're seeing on the news that can sometimes feel a little bit distant, I always try to say, okay, connect it to what's going on in my life or my family's life. And I know, for instance, that although I came here when I was quite young, came here when I was almost 8 years old, and grew up in the education system here, I learned almost nothing about Indigenous people in Canada. And the conflicts, the injustices, the culture, none of that was really a part of my learning. And so I've got a lot of work to do. And so when things like Black Lives Matter happen, I'm Black. This is, very personal to me. But I also need to use that as a stepping stone to, okay, what learning do I need to do? All of us have to do more to learn. And so I'm trying to find out, okay, why do things like the death of Joyce Echaquan in a Quebec hospital, or what's happening with the Mi'kmaq lobster fishermen out in Nova Scotia, why do they keep happening? And what can we all do to help bring more justice to situations like that? And that kind of brings it home for me. And so I don't feel like I can just kind of settle in and say, well, I understand anti-Black racism, I'm good. No, it goes broader than that, and I think we've all got a lot of learning to do.
Yeah, well, you've just touched on something I think is incredibly important to Reinvention, which is being aware of pop culture and what's going on, not just in pop culture, but in the world and in the context of, current affairs. What's happening in Nova Scotia with the lobster fishermen, as you said, what's happening in the world and what's happening in northern Canada, and the plight of the Indigenous people is our responsibility. It is all of our responsibility. It doesn't belong to somebody else. And I think that what movies, just kind of circling back on movies and films and the world that you come from, I think what people always say, the movie came out and therefore then it happened in the real world. It's not that at all. It's the creative minds, and I think the connection that movie makers have with what is happening in the undercurrents of the world, that they pull out and tease out and can see the trends and the moments happening really real, just as they're happening, on the cusp of they're happening. And then you see it on the screen, and then it has started to explode in the world, and then you see it everywhere. And I love the creativity and the insight that filmmakers have around what's really truly going on in our society and our culture. Nobody.
That's why I do this. Yeah, absolutely. And in the next several months, I think people in Canada and around the world will get a chance to see 3 new films by Indigenous women that we had at our festival. One of them is called Inconvenient Indian by Michelle Latimer, adapting the Thomas King book. Beans by Tracy Deer, which is the story of what was called the Oka crisis, but written from the perspective of a young girl behind the lines on reserve in Quebec. And then a movie called Monkey Beach by Loretta Todd, and all of them very strong, telling stories that are rooted in the lived reality of Canadians. These are things that you might see reported as news articles, but they actually tell stories that give you so much more depth and texture to what can sometimes appear as headlines that we can't do anything about. I still believe in the power of movies that way. I think movies can kind of give you a deeper understanding of things than sometimes you can get just from the news.
Well, I'm looking forward to watching those movies. I know, artists, musicians, and filmmakers alike. Gord Downey brought a lot of attention to what's happening with the Indigenous people. These films will do the same thing. What you do with and have done with TIFF. Thank you for bringing culture to our country and to to Toronto and the city, but around the globe. Thank you for helping open people's eyes to how you can reinvent yourself as a festival. Like I just think it's really, truly, I can't say enough the kudos that I feel around what you've done, because I know how hard it was, and I recognize it took real leadership, and I really appreciate it, Cameron. I thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much, Arlene. It's really been so good to talk with you, and we're just going to keep doing what we do, and let's hope we can keep improving people's lives and giving them something to connect with.
Is there any last thing you want to say to people out there that are going through the world right now? Any last thoughts you have?
I'm glad you're doing this, because I've seen you in so many different roles as well, and you seem to be very adept at reinventing your life and what's next for you, and I think that's inspiring for everybody. I think this is going to be a time of transition for so many people, right? People have lost their jobs, they have to reinvent themselves, they're forced to, but in many cases we get to do that by choice, and it's a good thing to think about. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Cameron. I'll see you at the movies, as they say.
All right, see you at the movies.
If I'm being honest, the world feels like a movie right now. Similar to how Cameron and his team had to identify the core essence of TIFF and what pulls people in, many find themselves in the position of trying to identify their core purpose and the why which gets them out of bed in the morning. But that discovery process does not have to be a lonely one. Just like businesses collaborate with their teams to find solutions, we sometimes need to seek the advice and experience of our friends and family to help guide the way. And as Cameron has shown, confidence is key, and knowing that there's always a solution will help lead us there. Stay safe and stay human. Thanks for listening, everybody.
This podcast is made possible by the great folks at Venture Communications. Thanks to our engineers, writers, producers, and all the folks who work really hard to bring you these great stories of reinventions each and every week.